Welcome back to Bookmas. It is another video and another excuse for me to talk about a bunch of books for an excessive amount of time. Before we get into it, I wanted to get a little bit sappy for a second and thank everybody for watching these videos. You guys are all so nice in the comments and encouraging me to keep going and getting really excited every time I post a video, and it really does mean a lot to me. I was super nervous going into Bookmas, just the thought of making 12 consecutive videos when usually I'm on more of a 2 videos a month, 3 videos a month sort of cadence through this year. It was a lot and it was super daunting and I was very scared to get into it, but you've all been really supportive and kind to me and I just appreciate it so much, more than you will ever be able to understand through a computer screen. So thank you so much. It's hard to believe that we are nearing the end of Bookmas already. There's a couple days left, which is really sad because that means Bookmas is over, but it's also kind of exciting because Christmas is coming and New Year's and January and 2025 reading goals, which brings me to the topic of this video, books that you should add to your 2025 TBR. Now you might be wondering, Olive, you just did a winter book recommendation video. Yes, I did, but these books specifically are not to be contained in winter only. These are books that you have 12 months to read. Just add them to your 2025 list, read them whenever the urge strikes you to pick up one of these books. It doesn't need to be confined to a month, it's fine. And I just want to talk about more books, so whatever, we're gonna do it. 2025 TBR, here we go. The first book that I think that you should add to your 2025 reading list is The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Mary Ann Schaefer and Annie Barrows. I love this book and I think that more people need to know about this book and need to read this book. I first discovered it because of the Netflix movie that came out a couple years ago, and I honestly can't believe that I haven't seen it before then, but this book is such a fun read. It follows our main character, Juliet, and it takes place right after World War II when all of the world is kind of resetting and rebuilding and figuring out how to be normal again. And we are specifically in England. We take place a bit in London and some neighboring islands as well. But Juliet is a writer and she writes a couple funny novels, funny books, and comic spreads that kind of make her pretty famous. And a lot of people around England are reading her books. Well, it just so happens that this group of people on a small island that was occupied by the Nazis during the war got a hold of one of her books, and they started a secret book club because you weren't allowed to gather during World War II, but they were able to start a secret book club and they called it the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. And they read one of Juliet's books and they absolutely loved it as a book club. Well, after the war, they lost the copies of her books, this book club did, and so one of the guys writes a letter to Juliet and asks if she would be so kind as to send a copy of her book to the book club again so that they can go through it. And the entire book takes place written through letters and the perspective of letters from different characters. It's totally the written word. There's not really a lot of dialogue between characters. It's more just retelling past tense correspondence, and I absolutely loved it. It's the first time that I've seen that writing mechanism. Wow, the fire died so fast. It's the first time that I've seen that writing mechanism done so well. It's an entire book. It's not that it's just like filling a couple chapters or a couple inserts throughout the narrative. It's actually the entire book. And I think it was done very, very effectively because even though it was just letters, I felt really, really connected to the characters. I felt really, really invested in the story and the setting and the entire plot of it. And I think it's just such a great, beautiful historical fiction if you're looking for something like that and along those lines for 2025. Next book that I think you should add to your 2025 reading list is The Alchemist by Brazilian author Paulo Coelho. The Alchemist was first published in 1988 and it follows our main character whose name is Santiago, and he is a young Andalusian shepherd boy who has this dream of discovering treasure in the Egyptian pyramids. And he keeps having these kind of visions and maybe actual dreams of him him going on this journey and potentially finding this treasure, and it really motivates him to go on kind of a pilgrimage to find what is called in the book his personal legend. Your personal legend in life is just kind of a concept that represents your one true purpose in your life. So Santiago thinks that his one true purpose is going to Egypt and finding treasures in the pyramids. Along his journey, he encounters many challenges, he learns many lessons, he comes across many different characters, including the titular Alchemist. It's kind of a coming of age story, honestly. And the reason I'm including this is it really is heralded as a book that people read when they're looking for inspiration in their life or purpose in their life. It's really short, so it's very easy to get through. It is kind of an old school writing style from my experience, especially if you've been reading really modern books recently. This does feel like it was written in the 80s and you can kind of feel its age, but it's very lyrical, very poetic writing, and it is pretty inspirational and sweet to follow Santiago on his journey. You really want to see him succeed. There's very timeless themes in this book of self-discovery and personal growth and finding your one true purpose in life. It's obviously a very inspirational message to kind of overcome those obstacles in life and follow your heart and pursue your dreams like our main character does throughout his journey. And it does include a lot of kind of philosophical symbolism to think about destiny and, again, like your purpose in life. It was just really fun. A lot of people say that this is one of those books that should be on your list of you have to read it at least once in your life. I'm not sure if I would go that far to say that everybody needs to read this book at least once in their life, but I did really enjoy it. I read it many years ago just because I thought that I should pick it up. I think maybe I read it on a list of this is a book that everybody needs to read at least once in their life, and that's why I initially read it. And again, I'm not sure if I totally agree with it being on that list, but I do think that it is a very beautiful and powerful read, and it is short, so you can get through it very quickly. I would definitely recommend that you consider adding this to your 2025 reading list. Starting off with two really short ones. And moving on, I went through a phase a couple years ago of reading older fantasy books, but not like Lord of the Rings, Narnia books. That's kind of a really intense world, a lot of world building, a lot of books in the series itself. It was more along the lines of like The Princess Bride and Neil Gaiman's Stardust and The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle, all sort of at the same time, just because I don't know why I was just in the mood to read older style fantasy books. This was written in the 1960s, and it is still considered to this day one of the best modern fantasies of all time. It's a standalone book, so it's not part of a series, so it's really easy to just kind of read as like a one and done, but it follows our main character, who is the last unicorn. She is slowly going on this journey through the book of realizing that she is the last unicorn, but maybe not fully accepting it, and her motivation as a character is kind of finding out the truth of what happened to her kind. Are there any other unicorns out there, and what's going on? And somewhere along the way, she actually gets turned into a human. So she's a human, she's a unicorn. That also is an interesting theme that is played with in this book. She goes from animal to human and is learning about identity and is learning about purpose, really kind of being more of a sentient being than versus just the unicorn in the beginning of the book. She meets a lot of people along the way. It's very, very fun. There's a magician called Schmendrick, which is just whimsical and great. There's a really big bad antagonist, and I love those types of books because you just want to see the good guy, the protagonist, beat the bad guy in the end, and this definitely falls kind of into that category. I don't know why I love this book so much. I think it's just very nostalgic for me. There was also a hilariously animated TV series or movie that came out of The Last Unicorn, kind of in the old style animation that The Hobbit was at the time. They're both very fun and whimsical, and I would recommend watching those if you want a good laugh. But the book itself of The Last Unicorn is such a fun and sweet read. And I do think that because this book is really considered a cornerstone of fantasy literature, if you are a fantasy reader at all, I think it's important that you read this book just to kind of have the foundation and the backstory of a lot of the modern books that we are reading now. So that's one of the reasons why I think you should add this to your reading list for 2025. We are cruising right along. Next, I want to recommend All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This is the only book that I have read that won the Pulitzer Prize. I think I've read a couple nominees, but this is a winner, and there's a very clear reason why it is a winner. So this also takes place during the time period of World War II, and it follows our main character, who's this little French girl named Marie Laure, and she and her father evacuate France and go to this little coastal town to try and be safe from Germany. And the whole time they are protecting this very precious gemstone that potentially has some magical properties that we are very unsure about in the beginning of this book. Marie Laure is also blind. We also follow our second main character, whose name is Werner, and he is this German boy who in the beginning of the book has an affinity for tinkering and engineering and specifically messing with radios, and so he gets recruited against his will. He really has no choice, but he gets recruited into the young Hitler's young army, the Hitler Youth, something with kids and Hitler. He gets recruited because he is such a good engineer at such a young age and is basically forced to become a Nazi, but he doesn't really want to be one, and it hurts his soul on the inside. But through a series of events, Werner's story and Marie Laure's story really intersect and cross paths in a lot of ways, and the story is just really beautiful. But the thing that is so wonderful about this book is the writing style and the prose that Anthony Doerr uses. If you are an annotator of books, which I'm not, but I do write down a lot of quotes, but if you are an annotator, this book would be fully marked up for you. There is some writing in here that is unmatchable to me with anything that I've ever read. It's so great, and I can't recommend it enough. I think that the author does such a good job at having a really dark setting, the darkness of World War II as kind of your foundation for your story, but the whole thing, he's really imbuing light and hope and inspiration through the book to the reader and even to the characters in his storytelling as well. And I think that that is such a masterclass in storytelling, having such a specific setting and almost having a juxtaposition of storytelling and writing within that dark setting. And it's really just about kind of trying to find the light and hope in places that we cannot see, but knowing that it's there makes us feel better inside. Read All the Light We Cannot See if you haven't already. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to recommend is actually a series, and unfortunately I'm missing the very first book in the series, but it's an Agatha Christie series. It's the Tommy and Tuppence series. The first book is The Secret Adversary, and then there's 4 other books after it. If you've never read Agatha Christie before, or if you are kind of intimidated with reading Agatha Christie and maybe the subject matter that she has, I think that this is a really good starting place for you, especially with mystery, because it's very lighthearted, it's very humorous, but it's Agatha Christie, so the mysteries are so good at the same time. The reason that I specifically like this series so much is because it follows Tommy and Tuppence, who in the beginning, the very first book, they start out as friends who slowly have a developing romance by the end of the book. And then the next 4 books, we've got significant time jumps. In the second book, I think they're on their way to getting married. In the third and the fourth book, they're working on kind of their middle-aged lives. They have kids at this point. And the very last book in this series, they're elderly people. They are an old man and an old woman solving crime together, and it's just adorable. It's so cute. And then you throw in just the Agatha Christie-ness of it, amazing mystery that is written, and the great character storytelling, and it's so fun. This is just a really fun read. I think that you can read every one of these books as a standalone, but reading it as a series, even if it's across a pretty significant amount of time, it's just so fun to get the complete story. And starting with them at the beginning where they're young and they're just friends, they barely even know each other, and they're solving crime together, all the way to when they're old, they've been married for a long time, their kids have kids, they're grown up, moved out of the house, and they're still solving crime together. It's really sweet. You should definitely give this a shot if you have any interest in Agatha Christie or mystery for 2025. I think this is a good place to start. And then the last book that I'm going to recommend for you to add to your 2025 list is a book that really means a lot to me. It is one of my favorite books of all time. I think I've read it 5 or 6 times at this point, but it is Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan Safran Foer. The reason that I love Jonathan Safran Foer so much is because of his writing style. It is very particular, it's very specific, and I think that there's a solid chance that people could hate it and love it. It's not really a writing style where you're kind of just in the middle and neutral to it, because it is incredibly distinct. So if you don't like it, I could see how that could hinder you being able to consume the story. But for me, it completely adds to the story, it adds to the book and the writing itself. I am just absolutely obsessed with it. I've read all of his books at this point. I love him so much, but this is the first one that I read, and this book wrecks me every single time I read it. I am sobbing by the end of it. It follows our main character, Oscar, who is, I think he's like an 11 or 12-year-old boy, and his father had died a couple years ago, but they would do this game, him and his father, where he kind of is sent on a scavenger hunt throughout New York City and Manhattan and all of the different boroughs, and his dad would leave little clues around the city for him to go and find and bring back treasures. And he's a really, really smart kid, but he's very socially unaware at the same time, so he's kind of interesting to read about because he, again, is extremely intelligent, but he just has no filter for the characters that he's meeting. And I think that he's just written really, really well and really, really interestingly. The book follows Oscar as he is basically going on one last scavenger hunt that his father set up for him before he died, and it's kind of Oscar's last bit that he has of his father. He's dealing with relationship issues with his mother as well, just because they're both going through so much grief and pain because of the loss of his father. He's very close to his grandmother, and something that's interesting about this book is we also have time jumps back and forth from the past and the present. And in the past, we're learning a lot about Oscar's grandmother and her relationship and everything that she went through in order to set up Oscar and his father and his family well in New York City. So her and Oscar have a very, very close relationship. It kind of reminded me a little bit of My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Friedrich Backman, but this book feels a lot more artistic and a lot more out of the box. Even the way that the book is laid out itself, there's a lot of photos in the book. There's a lot of single pages with just like one word on them. There's a whole section where Oscar is at an art store looking for a clue that his father may have left, and he describes walking down the aisles of all of the markers where they have the little pieces of paper in front of the shelves where people can test out the colors. And in the book itself, if you can actually see this, like all of the testings that Oscar is describing and everything that Oscar is seeing with his own eyes. So it's a very visual book at the same time, and that really helped me kind of follow along on his journey. And it's just really, really beautiful. This book means a lot to me, and I am never not recommending it to people. Read this book as soon as possible. I won't be that offended if you don't like it, because I do understand that it's very out there and very distinct in the writing style, but to me it's just so beautiful, and it truly is a work of art. So definitely add this to your list. Alright, since I have just given you a bunch of books that I think that you should add to your 2025 TBR list, I think it's only fair to share some of my books that are currently on my list for 2025. I'll go through them pretty quickly, but I just wanted to let you know some of the books that I'm really looking forward to reading this year. And the first one is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. I already talked about this in another video, but this will be my second read through of Throne of Glass, the series. I attempted to read Throne of Glass many years ago. I think when it first came out, and I hated it. I thought the writing was so bad and so cheesy. And to be fair, in book 1 and in book 2, the writing is really bad and really cheesy, and I struggle through the first couple of books. However, after that first attempt, after I DNF'd Throne of Glass the first time, a couple years later I ended up reading ACOTAR, and in my mind I hadn't even fully connected that they were by the same author, and I loved ACOTAR. It became one of my favorite series, and it still is one of my favorite fantasy series. series. It's such a comfort read to me. After I reread ACOTAR for the second time in early 2023, I decided that I should finally give Throne of Glass a solid chance because I just saw everybody ranting and raving about how much they love this series. So I read Throne of Glass, I made it through all of the books, and I get it. I'm completely on board with how incredible the series is. The reason that I want to reread it, it will have been almost 2 years later when I reread it, and the reason I want to go through it again is because I read through it super fast the first time, to the point when I think I missed some stuff. I probably missed some details because I was just in full binge mode. I just needed to get to the end because I needed to have a conclusion to the story. So this time I'm excited to kind of read slower and really take my time going through the book so that I just get everything that I possibly can out of it. I also am really excited to do the tandem read because I've never tandem read a book before, and everybody talks about how you gotta tandem read, I think, book 5 and 6 in this series. So I'm excited to do that. And I also have never read Assassin's Blade, so I'm going to be adding that into my reread this time. I'm not sure where I'm going to put it in the series, if I read it first or second or third. I know there's so many opinions on the internet, so let me know if you have an opinion on when I should read it, in the first slot or the second slot or the third slot. But Assassin's Blade will be a first time read for me, and I'm just really excited. So this is probably going to be the first book that I read in January, if I'm being honest. Next, I have 2 V.E. Schwab books that I'm really excited to read. I am a huge V.E. Schwab fan. She wrote The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which is one of my favorite books. She also wrote the Shades of Magic trilogy, which I think is such a good adult fantasy trilogy. And apparently, The Fragile Threads of Power is set in the Shades of Magic world, and it does follow new characters, but there are some of the old characters that are mentioned and I think make an appearance. Specifically, Lila, I think, is in this one quite a bit. This is a thick book, which is one of the reasons why I haven't started it yet, because I've just not been in the headspace to read a 700-page fantasy right now. But I do really want to read it. I think I might get it on Kindle because I think that will be easier for me to get through, not reading such a big physical copy. And then the other V.E. Schwab book that I'm really excited about is Gallant. I actually attempted to read this one, I think last summer, but I was in a pretty rough reading slump and I only got about 20 pages in and knew that this was not going to be the book for me to read at the time. So I very quickly pulled myself out of it. I don't even know if I would completely consider that to be a DNF because I just didn't get very far at all. But I've heard such great things about this book and it has been on my shelf for a little bit, and I'm really excited to dive into it. I might do these back to back just to be fully in the V.E. Schwab universe. I talked about this a couple books ago, but I am going to be reading The Night and Gale by Kristen Hanna early this year, probably in January and or February. This is the next pick for the book club that I am in, and I'm really excited to read this because I've had The Night and Gale on my TBR for a long time. I actually have The Four Winds on my shelf right now by Kristen Hanna, and I just haven't really been in a historical fiction mood for a bit, so I haven't ended up picking this up. But now that this is the book club book for the beginning of the year, it's a good motivator for me to read this one, finally get it on my read list, and then I feel like I'll probably be really interested in reading The Four Winds after that. Okay, probably saw that one coming. Another book that I'm really excited to read in 2024 is one that I bought a couple months ago from Barnes & Noble just because I saw it was a new release and because the cover was really cool, and that's the only reason. And it's The Curious Tithe by Pascal Lascelles, which is such a cool author name. I really don't know anything about this. I think it's kind of a dark, atmospheric fantasy where like the magic is tied to the moon and the tides specifically. I have really high expectations and high hopes for the magic system of this world and the foundation of this world, to the point where I think I'm gonna wait to read it because maybe my expectations are a little too high, and that typically leads to disappointment for me, if I'm being completely honest. So I'm gonna give it a little bit to settle my expectations lower, but I am still very excited to read this one. I'm not sure if this is a series or is planned to be a series, but I love the cover and that's why I bought it. And then the next one that I wanted to note specifically that I'm excited to read for 2025 is The Hazelborn Ladies Motorcycle and Flying Club. This is another historical fiction kind of around women doing things that they shouldn't be doing back in 1919. So this is right after World War II. And I think all of the men are returning back from the war, and women are going back to doing things that women should be doing instead of taking the men's place in daily lives. And so I think that it's just going to be a really cool female empowerment, great group of sisterhood ensemble writing. I'm just very excited about this. I'm surprised by the amount of historical fiction that I'm looking forward to reading this year. I don't read a lot of historical fiction, but I love historical fiction. I think I just typically stray away from it because a lot of times they're very, very long and dense, and a lot of times they take place around war, and war makes me sad. So I have to be pretty particular with the historical fiction books that I read because they wreck my soul every single time, as history has shown. But this one, you know, the cover looks relatively lighthearted, so we could be good. I don't know. All right, so that is a lot of books that we just covered, talking about books that you should add to your 2025 reading list, books that I want to add to my 2025 reading list, and really just everybody's TBR is overflowing at this point. But I hope you were able to find some good picks for the next year, and would love to know if you've already read some of these, especially the ones that I'm hoping to read in 2025. Would love to know your thoughts. Level my expectations here a bit, just because I think that is always a good idea. But thank you so much again for watching and hanging out with me here, and we will see you next time for more Bookmas content.